This is the Converging Perspectives podcast.
These days, it seems like when we're talking to our friends with different political views, it is just a fight for the facts. We can't agree on what reality actually is. And most of the time, those conversations just break down because it's about, well, I saw this and I believe that's true. And it's completely contrary to what you believe. And that means that one of us is right and one of us is wrong. And we're just going to agree to disagree. And that kills the conversation, right?
It does. And I think that those interactions do not even deserve to be called conversations. The word conversation, converso, means with back and forth. And if there isn't actually an exchange of listening and speaking, listening, and with emphasis on the listening, it's not really a conversation. It's two people expressing deep, troubled emotions at each other, not with each other. Yeah. So you're not talking about a conversation. You're talking about a combative form of verbalization.
And we can blame all of this on social media and the sort of loss of trust in mainstream media, where there is some corroboration of what the facts actually are. But no, we're going to go to podcasts and opinion people that we agree with, and that's going to be more comfortable and more dopamine rewarding for my brain, but we're not going to agree on reality anymore.
Well, that's really important, Andrew, because what you're saying is that what is being modeled for all of us and for young people, sadly, is combative verbalization. It's very rare to find real conversations online. Fortunately, there are some great podcasts where people really are having conversations, i.e., the host is actually listening and responding to what is being said by their guest. And so you can feel that the conversation is actually flowing, moving, growing, because each is contributing to the same stream.
Yeah. I'd like to call that a conscious conversation.
Good. That's a good term.
So in a conscious conversation, you're actually having an interaction with reality together. And you're trying to work on reality together, meaning I believe that you have resource and access to information I don't, or perspective I don't. And I want to work with your mind to triangulate a better solution than I currently have come up with.
Yeah. That is beautifully articulated. You've described sort of a three-dimensional aspect of what conversation between two people can and should be. But that does require, as you say, a certain amount of trust, because you're entering a playing field in which unknown things might take place. So it's no longer about you maintaining complete control over what things look like. You're saying, I would love to explore and experiment with you to see what might emerge, rather than here is my view of reality. I'm going to push it on you until you say yes or run away.
So why is this conscious conversation that we're talking about so rare today?
Well, number one, in a place of fear, you don't have the established trust for people to allow for vulnerability and uncertainty. When you are highly stressed, anxious, and frightened, you will retreat. The last thing you want is to show your belly, be vulnerable, and leave openings for somebody else to come in and manipulate.
Right. And that fear sparks our built-in tribalism, which is the basis of most belief, right? Belief is not really about truth for most of us. At a primal level, belief is about signaling to my in-group that I agree with you, that we're loyal to the same ideological structure that binds us together.
And language does that very, very quickly. You listen for the tropes, the cliches, the common phrases that let you go, well, I'm going to be safe with this person because they're part of my tribe.
And I think I like to notice that, like when I'm in a conversation or when I'm watching some sort of news program that's really more opinion than anything else, there's all sorts of just virtue signaling to the core ideological framework of the group. And it's like, okay, so this is like a religion. This is like a church service where everyone's like, oh yes, our faith is the best. Our faith is the best. And it has nothing to do with getting to a better truth or solving problems. It's really just about we're together and we believe we're right.
Which is why it's so important to have spaces where conversation can be made conscious. And sometimes that requires a third person, almost like a mediator, to make sure that the conversational space has been created in a neutral zone so that both participants feel that they can afford to lay down some of their armor and defensive strategies.
Yeah.
But if it's just two people, again, I love this phrase, conscious conversation, because you can ask the other person, are you willing to have a conversation where we maintain like a meta analysis above the actual flow of words that we're speaking, but we're also watching our own conversation and the constructs we're bringing and stepping in to pause or correct ourselves if we've made a huge assumption and we suddenly sense that you're not sharing that assumption? Can we agree to be conscious of the outer structure as well as the content and mediate it ourselves when necessary? And I think that's what you're looking for in our conversation. Can we have a
Yes.
meta conversation about conversation?
Yes. And that's what I think this episode is really about is understanding and modeling, if we can. There is a way through this malaise, the political times that we're in. It's seeming intractable. People are exhausted. People are giving up. They're like, it's over. Civil war is inevitable. We're never going to agree on this reality anymore. I have friends who are so pro-Israel that they just do not watch any mainstream news anymore. They only watch pro-Israeli propaganda. And I have friends who are on the opposite extreme. You know, they like anything that suggests that Israel might have done something right is heinous.
Right. Or the argument about the trans culture and whether it's medically necessary, psychologically healthy, etc. People on both sides are now so dug in and intractable that it's fireworks very quickly.
And when you have that, we have to recognize that when people have that need for their preconceived narrative or story or agenda to be reconfirmed all the time, that's a sacred value. That's a sacred value, basically, that people are afraid to touch. It triggers them to endanger it because it's somehow like a building block in their personality at this point that if it were to be destabilized, they'd feel very unsafe and they would be more fearful and anxious than usual. And so they're clinging to it. When you feel that kind of restraint, you should probably realize that I'm not going to have a good conversation here. I've gotten my hand slapped a few times by moving in curiously to play with ideas with someone who was really not interested in playing with those ideas.
Well, and, in the therapeutic or counseling realm, and I've done so much of this over the years. Again, one of the first things you learn is that what might be blazingly clear and obvious to you may still be unconscious for the person that you're working with. And to move in too soon is just an aggressive, unhelpful move because they will retreat further and the walls will go up and they will shut down over that issue. So you do not sometimes move in on someone who is still needing that protective device around them. You wait until they are actually ready and become curious on their own about what it is that they have cemented around themselves. What is that protective bubble I've created with my beliefs? Am I willing to lift the veil and peek outside the world that I've created for myself? It has to be the right time. Kairos, right? The kairotic moment. That's what all teachers and therapists are waiting for, the moment when the student or the client is actually ready to move forward.
Right. And so we're not going to have a conscious conversation with everybody we know or meet. Early signs of this is not a conscious conversation that I'm about to have are just belligerence and tight emotions. If you feel unsafe speaking some idea into the space, it's probably because it's not a safe place for a conscious conversation.
The discernment is probably step number one. You have to be very, very honest with yourself and the other person. Is a conscious conversation possible? And if not, you're respectful and you back off. Right. I don't think there are other options. But fortunately, I do believe that there are plenty of people, whether we're talking about politics of war, politics of gender identity, there are plenty of people who are willing to step into the place of conscious conversation, and a lot more who would like to if they knew how.
I would argue that right now, any conversation that is not conscious is really rather counterproductive, that you can't really get to any new place because basically we have people lying in politics, blatantly lying on both sides about what the reality is, either just bending reality a lot to shape the narrative they want you to believe or outright lying. And so people are literally coming with opposite facts. And so to butt heads around that literally just entrenches people deeper into their confirmation bias and their backfire effect. It's like, well, never going to listen to that perspective again. And so having any non-conscious conversation, argument, fight is worse than useless. It's actually preventing conscious conversation from happening with that person in the future. And it's dysregulating your nervous system and priming you to be more argumentative the next time this topic comes up, instead of leaning in and being curious, like, well, why would you do that? I mean, for example, I have friends who believe in narratives that are kind of ridiculous from my perspective. They're just like, that can't possibly be true. What you're saying, that's a conspiracy theory that's based on this central power that controls everything like a god, and that's just not reality. And so what do you do when you have a friend who has that kind of perspective and they just told you this wild narrative that they believe with great conviction, this is true?
Well, of course, one of the best ways to start any conversation is by showing a little bit of vulnerability yourself. So you identify some storyline that you believed and built an edifice around in your life and later realized was not built on the truth. You realized it was a story you'd been telling yourself for self-protective or ego-soothing purposes, and that it was actually holding you back. Right. And neuroscience will confirm that that's what we do. We construct our realities based on stories, most of which are not completely accurate. And then we continue to tell them. And it's like just adding layers to the wall of that little tower that we're going to live inside. So once you've identified one of your own interior structures or narratives, you could then talk about how you had to dismantle it brick by brick in order to get a wider view, in order to liberate yourself from the prison you'd put yourself in. So you've made yourself vulnerable and you've given a very clear description of what it's like to become curious enough to be willing to take down the bricks and dismantle one of your belief systems. Then you'll be able to tell if their curiosity has been aroused. Oh, am I living in some kind of closed tower anywhere in my life? Maybe it is possible to get out of that.
Right. And if you think that that kind of approach might be easily read and someone feel like you're being condescending to them because you're already like trying to set them up to question their reality, and they're not really exactly interested in that right away, I would also propose more of an NVC approach. And nonviolent communication suggests that you can change your language from jackal, argumentative, attacking language to giraffe language, like a peaceful, non-meat eater language. But you could also change your ears from jackal ears that only hear aggressive fight talk to giraffe ears, which are so high above the trees that all you hear are the values underneath what somebody is saying.
Lovely.
So someone's spewing out all of these beliefs, this long diatribe of what's going on in the world. And instead of going, wow, they literally think this is true, try to read between the lines to what values they're expressing with this mythology. This story that's not necessarily really true, but at some level, emotionally, it rings true to them. And there's a reason it rings true. And you might even have that in common. And when you pick out the values that they're expressing with the story, you might be able to go, I really agree with this feeling that the world is not honest today, that there's a lot of untrustworthy people in high positions of power that really ought to be thrown out on their ear. You can find a way to start agreeing without lying to them and saying, oh, I totally agree with your ridiculous narrative. It's like, no, I don't, but I see why you believe this. And I actually like you because of these values that you champion, which I also value very much.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. So the use of images here is very helpful. And you've introduced the jackal and the giraffe. I'd like to introduce another mnemonic device that I use with my students at the university a lot, who, when they come in to discuss something, almost always go straight for what I call the water level of conversation, which is the feeling, the emotional, the opinion. And that's what we've been describing here, that you start right in with my feeling and and you're very aroused by that feeling function. So here's another image then, which is that of Noah's Ark floating on the great flood waters. Right? Everybody comes in floating on their own little boat of floodwaters. And what we're trying to do is find where the land is. because the land, the earth under the water are actually the solid foundational facts and values. It's like the basic formation that underlies your real world, right? The foundational philosophy, the bedrock of your belief system. And if you can get someone curious enough to send out their dove looking for land, meaning they have to go through and under the emotional layer to try to find the land, is the very best place to start. And again, because not only will they discover their own personal experiences, beliefs from family, beliefs from their religious organizations or their parents' political stripe, whatever, but they may also discover their foundational values, the sacred values that are supporting and holding and shaping the water, right? Water does not hold its own shape. Water will be formed into any shape container that it's poured into.
Right.
So what we're trying to figure out is what's the container that's making your belief system the shape that it is. And if everyone's willing to do that deep dive looking for land, now you've got the ground level, discovered the facts, and you've explored your own emotional watery terrain of what my personal beliefs are and why I have all of these opinions.
Right.
Then the goal, of course, is to lift everybody up into the realm of ideas, because it's only when you're willing to leave behind that deeply personal, reactive, ego protective, psychologically unconscious realm that you can have a conscious conversation. Because ultimately, a conscious conversation is taking place in the air realm, where there is space for actual listening. My contention is that if you are just in the earth and water realms, there is no space. You are completely submerged in your own personal shtick. It's all about the ego and its needs, the clamor for that self-protection and self-aggrandizement and safety. And again, this is Jung's idea that the water represents the unconscious. You can't see it. You have to be willing to go into it and lift up those beliefs and ideas and make them conscious where we can see them. That is the moment that you enter a conscious conversation.
Right. You know, what this looks like, of like literally drilling down into your value set, your psychology, and trying to understand what's the basis, what's the groundwork of my belief system. When I've done this, it's really been fascinating because I've drilled into, well, I was raised in Christian Science and Joseph Campbell ideas and Jung, and what is the central theme behind all of these philosophies that have been so sticky for my mind. And it turns out that the Transcendental movement is really the bedrock of my philosophy, and I still like it. But if I really want to challenge my root belief system, I need to look for scholars who criticize the Transcendental movement and its philosophy and have problems with it. It's like, oh, well, I see this as a problem. I see this as a problem. And what's interesting is when I do that, it's initially a little like, I don't like this attack on my value system. Eventually, I start to swim with these new ideas and go, oh, that's a problem I've seen too with my peers. Like, that's a blind spot. And that's really exciting to see. And now it's like I'm in a growing philosophical conversation with other thinkers who are reaching past the roots of my traditions into a new exploration of truth. What is more true than what I currently believe? As much as I appreciate and think my root traditions are phenomenal, what more is there to discover beyond my current horizon?
Right. Well, I very well remember a lot of the conversations we had around this. Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, the metaphysics of Christian Science, Buddhism, Hinduism, neuroscience, various psychologies, materialism, the philosophy of existential. I mean, all of these become part of the bigger conversation. But very specifically, you and I had to go down and discover that fundamental transcendental belief that the material world is not the beginning or the end. There is another world that stands behind the material world, which is its source, right? That's the nature. Transcendentalism is the recognition of this invisible world that is the creative force behind everything. But once you've identified that, then you can go in and find out, well, what are the dangers of that belief? And of course, we recognized very quickly that the belief is extraordinarily fragile because our minds tend to collapse, become flat, and descend into dualism.
Right.
So that we're caught in a material existence, but we're trying to fly higher, like poor Icarus, into the realm of transcendent ideals like Plato. And we don't know how to bridge it. We don't know how to bring them together. And so you begin this terrible split within the self and the belief system. But it was only by identifying what's the weakness of transcendentalism that we were able to see, wow, that's why so many healings don't actually happen, because we've missed that all important connecting link and the tremendous effort that it takes not to split into dualism.
Right. And dualism can create a literal disembodiment of the being, which is psychologically not sound.
Tremendous sense of disappointment and dismay that you throw out the transcendental and collapse into a disappointed, despairing materialism.
Which
Yes.
leads to nihilism,
Yeah.
typically.
So good point. If you're honest and deeply curious and keep pushing, you will find where the weaknesses are in your belief system and where, for instance, are there fissures at the ground level? Are you likely to experience some catastrophic, destructive psychic break if you don't go down and examine what's happening in the unconscious?
Right. So let's make this a little more practical for people, because this may seem a little daunting to go, oh yes, I'm going to right now, I'm going to examine all of my root philosophies and tear them asunder. Let's think about, in the practical world today, like, how do we advance from this bullish, intractable stubbornness of like, this is my opinion and I'm right and you're wrong? How do we move through the layers up into the conscious conversation and even the transformative conversation?
Well, let me start by giving you a little taste of what I make my philosophy students go through in class. And I kind of use this, elemental structure: earth, water, air, fire. We haven't talked about fire yet, but if you think of the 4 elements, it's a very handy tool for seeing how you move through the stages of conversation to get to a higher place. So in discussion, most students will either start with the earth element, which is just, here are the facts, because that's what they've been told to do in grade school. What are the facts? When was the war? Who fought it? Who were the generals? Who won? Who lost? That's all earth-based conversation, just the facts. In college, if you ask people to have a discussion, some students will move to the water. Well, here's my opinion. Here's what I feel about that. So this is where we begin. And I've got a tool that I use called How to Turn an Opinion into an Argument, because an actual argument requires that you bring evidence and actual facts into the conversation. You have to back up your opinion. An opinion without evidence to back it up is just a small floating device that's going to be overturned and send you spinning off. It's not valuable. You're trying to build a bridge that will bring people across your reasoning, your logical argument, so that they can actually see how you arrived at the other side of your argument. It's the essence of it. But again, it's what we've talked about. Start with your opinion. That's fine. Recently, my students were having to debate DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is facing such tremendous political opposition. Where do you stand? It is open. It is completely open for debate. Right now, it's on the table. So let's see where you stand on this and why. Start with your opinion, but now go down. Find the evidence and the roots. Why do you feel that way? You have to examine your direct actual experiences. And believe me, if you didn't get a job or you were demoted because somebody got the job because they were a DEI hire, you will have resentment. And you have to be able to unpin your personal resentment and experience and actually look at the idea itself, the concept of DEI, and be able to enter the air realm where you can look at it from that dispassionate place. So this is the coaching that I'm giving my students, how to move through those realms to get into the air realm, which is where academic scholarly discussions should take place, because that's where you get to move. That's the freedom of movement, where the other ideas come and you're willing to engage them, to entertain them without prejudice, and to see them for what they actually are, because now they're not disguised. They are absolutely clear. They stand there uncostumed, as it were, by other people's opinions. They are the facts and the ideas that you can now engage with. And it's very exciting to see a group of students be able to move past their own emotional reactions to engage with others who believe something different and go, wow, well, given your experience, I can see why you would look at it that way. And, it never occurred to me to think about it that way. But yeah, would I want to live in a world in which if you were disadvantaged because of your ethnicity, there was like no chance for you ever to get onto an even playing field? But I actually want to live in a world like that? These are the kinds of conversations that all good teachers want their students to be having. This is where you reach the open-mindedness that means we're having a conscious conversation.
And so maybe an example of this would be talking to people about like, oh, well, I know these tariffs might, seemed like they might damage the economy. It's like, but I could also see maybe we do get some industrial factories back. And like, how would that actually look? What is it, instead of like, it's just terrible, or, it's the right thing to do. It's like, well, what are the consequences likely to be?
Right. And are we talking short term or long term? And do we have evidence that the use of tariffs in the long term has actually proved useful for the country imposing them? Let's get some data here. Let's stop being reactive. If this were a Democratic president imposing tariffs, what happened then? Was it useful? Did it go in the direction? Were there too many side effects like other nations imposing restrictive tariffs as revenge to make it not really useful? I mean, all of these, we need to bring them up. We need to make them conscious. Now, we haven't talked about the final realm of conscious conversation, the fire realm. And I think it's because that happens so rarely that most of us can't even recall when we had a fire conversation.
Speak for yourself.
Let me describe, let me describe it, and then we'll see how many fire conversations you've been in. I think what distinguishes fire conversations is that it ceases to be persona driven. It's no longer ego driven, right? We gave that up at the air level. But when you get to the fire level, it's as if you have been taken over by the idea. The idea itself is now driving the conversation. If you think of the power of fire and how it throws up the sparks, that's what that kind of conversation is like. It's almost like pure intuition. You've moved into the space where the interactions and transformations are moving so quickly that it's all being blown upwards. You feel uplifted as if you were carried on these fiery winds of exhilaration. I want to use as an example the series called The Power of Myth, where Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell are having this exciting conversation, a lot of which is in the air realm, right? Two men talking with these ideas about things. But every once in a while, you can feel that Moyers has constructed a question that's hit Campbell in a way that he's never quite heard it before. And his intuition has suddenly launched him off in another direction. And it's the excitement, the frisson that you feel. It's like you could see people engaging with this material just being lifted out of their seats, as if a fire had been lit in the mind. What's fascinating about this, and I worked for the Joseph Campbell Foundation for 12 years. I've had many conversations with people who actually said, Rebecca, I watched that series multiple times, and I didn't actually understand a lot of what they were talking about, but it was so exciting. I was so moved that I felt that I'd been transported to a new place. That's a fire conversation, that you are changed. Something has shifted so profoundly. Fire is the alchemical agent. Without heat, nothing changes in alchemy. You have to apply heat for the chemical transformations to take place. Right. So a fire conversation is all about the transformation of the two people involved and those who may be witness to such a conversation.
So it's kind of like an epiphany, or that moment in a movie where the camera is moving back and zooming in at the same time, so all the perspective is changing. Right. Just like,
Yeah.
Whoa. I think the reason it feels like that is because some major piece of your map of the world
Mm.
has suddenly shifted and it reframes your entire picture of reality.
Yes.
It's just
Yes.
a little, and a little shift at a tectonic plate will
Exactly.
do that.
The shift of the tectonic plate, one of the most often quoted sentences from the Power of Myth series is Bill Moyers leaning forward and going, so, what is the meaning of life then? Right? And that's like the great cliche question that you ask the wise master, what the meaning of life? And Campbell leans forward and says, I don't think people are seeking the meaning of life. They want to know the experience of being alive. Boom! That's a tectonic plate.
Yeah.
And you could see Moyers was like so startled. You're like, what?
Yeah.
So many people quote that because that was a fire moment. Suddenly, that idea that we have to find the meaning of life was just like pulled out, the rug pulled out from under them. It was like,
Right.
whoa, suddenly things got a lot more exciting than I thought.
And I'd heard that quote many times before I really got it. That line didn't hit home for me until I'd had a very mystical experience of my own, in which my mind just suddenly said to me, "You trying to distill everything into truth is reducing your experience of being alive. You're literally creating an abstracted reality and trying to live in that abstracted reality in your mind instead of feeling the far vaster nodes of communication and tendrils of information and energy that are moving all around you all the time. That's life. Why don't you live instead of just know stuff?"
Yeah. It's like, trying to survive by eating the menu rather than the food. Well, and the problem with meaning is that we actually have put meaning into such a small box. It means we have to cognitively have digested it and be able to articulate it in an elevator pitch, the meaning, which is so small as to be meaningless as a mode of operation for life itself. So that's the problem with talking about meaning. We've made the word too small. When you actually have the breakthrough and get out of your little mind and experience the enormity of life, you are living the meaning and you don't need to talk about it, right? As the Vedas say, any truth that can be spoken is not the real truth. That says the same thing as what Campbell was saying.
I think of it as this sort of religion of truth that I believe in, basically, which is that the truth is that unknowable thing just beyond the horizon that I'm always reaching for.
Right.
I never can hold it, but I'm always reaching, because if I stop reaching, then I have given into some ideology that I know is not true.
And anything you can hold in your hand is way too small to be your philosophy of life or your God. And yet, to return to the beginning of our conversation, that's where most people want to start. I want to know the truth, and I'm going to hold it in my hand so that when I come at you with my fist in this verbal debate, I've got a lot of weight behind it. It's like, no, that's not it. Let go. Open your hands.
All of that is a fiction. All of that argumentation is basically a useless fiction. And the kind of answers we need for a highly polarized world today will not come from any of that. It's essentially like throwing bullets or bombs at each other in the ideological realm. It's not useful. It literally just causes people to get more defensive and more angry. And so the only way out of this is by basically painfully opening our hearts to recognize that we don't know it all, and the other person has information that I don't have, and that by basically assimilating with other people, we're going to find a greater truth together. And as painful as that may be, because we have a lot of disgust in the emotional realm right now. Trump is a man who's very disgusted with other people, and it breeds a lot of disgust within the dialogues.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of disgust, which is an emotion tied to, like, I don't want to be poisoned by that thing over there. I want to be pure over here. And you know what? I think we're all going to have to get dirty in order to get through this. We're going to have to be willing to go, I am going to try very hard to open my mind and wrestle with these ideas that, like, I believe so strongly in social value and taking care of people, but I understand that there may be a place where that's not going to be possible anymore. Like, we literally don't have enough wealth to always do that to the same level that we want to, that socialism has limits, and that I want fairness, but I also understand that taxing corporations too much will literally cause some of them to flee, and then we'd have less of an economic base. Like, ideas like that, which are, and I'm not saying that's the only the only reality here. I think we're way out of skew on
Right.
that issue
You're just
already.
pointing out that you've been able to move between the tension on those spectrums of liberal and conservative. You're
Yeah,
entertaining more conservative ideas than you once
yeah.
did.
And we have to
Let's
wrestle.
yeah, let's go to the core belief that you just stated there, which is the false belief that people have that the self is a contained entity, that you can actually establish borders or boundaries that make you invulnerable to other people. That is absolutely impossible. That is not true. There is no place where we can actually become an island and not be touched by the community and the beliefs around us.
And this is an illness. This is a mental illness
Mhm.
that's incredibly common, but it happens to most religious groups after a while. We're like, we must not be contaminated by any of the ideas from the other outside world. We must stay pure to our principles. Otherwise, we're gonna die as a religion. And yet that very mentality is the death sentence for the religion.
The point is that if Carl Jung is right, if neuroscience is right, we are all intimately connected. And if you go down below your level of personal awareness, you discover that all of the beliefs, your moods, even your physiology is directly connected to what everybody around you is thinking and doing and feeling and experiencing. The air we breathe makes us connected, right? But also, and again, we're talking a little now at the transpersonal, the collective unconscious is the great ocean in which we are all swimming. So you may have identified your little place in the ocean and its peculiar terrain, but it is connected to everybody else's personal terrain in the unconscious. So to have the conscious conversation means that you go to another person with the open hand. And of course, the handshake originated to show that you were not carrying a weapon, right? Open hand to say, would you like to explore the depths? I'd like to see how my experience is connected to yours because I know it is. And what are the underwater currents that are affecting both of us? And what is the bedrock that we share? Because there will be shared bedrock. We can identify values that all human beings have in varying degrees, but we all share some basic values because we are physiologically Homo sapiens. It's how we're hardwired. So the willingness to go with someone down into the depths and do that exploration is, I think, what we're coaching and asking people to try to do with each other.
Right. And it may seem inherently anti-conservative because the conservative psychology is to put boundaries around things and have good good walls around what we value. And I think in order to take those walls down, in order to basically increase the health of the overall ecosystem of ideas, in order for those walls to come down naturally, you have to create a lot of safety. People and show people a lot of love and respect is like, I get what your values are. Your traditional family values are beautiful. The traditional yin and yang, masculine and feminine dynamic that you cherish so much, I think it's gorgeous. I have no disagreements with that. There are other things that I want to allow other people to have their freedom to explore different variations of that may be strange to you. But at the same time, I do not want to tear down your beautiful core values. I want to cherish them and protect them. Once you get that kind of safety built in, then maybe the walls can start to come down and curiosity can rise again.
Now, there were some very beautiful terms introduced by an author named Gail Sheehy in a book, a bestseller maybe 30, 35 years ago. It was a book about the different types, the typologies of people that make up a healthy society. One group she called the pathfinders, those for whom curiosity is the driving force, and they're always breaking boundaries and exploring and going beyond. But she said you have to honor the tradition bearers, because a society that moves too quickly into the unknown path can actually destroy itself. It can end up in such trouble and it doesn't have anywhere to return to safety. So the tension between the pathfinder and tradition bearer is one that a healthy society needs to honor. And I don't think anything has changed in 35 years. We need the conservative tradition bearers and we need the innovative liberal pathfinders. And the two will always coexist and the tension is greater or lesser. And right now it is extremely great to the breaking point. And so maybe as pathfinders, our first mission is to recognize how to honor the tradition bearers, to move closer to them in order to lubricate that fragile connection that has been ruptured to the breaking point of late. Does that make sense? Does that image?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's what's needed. And it's going to hurt a little bit, I think, because it's hard for us to step away from the values that we think are being trampled on right now in order to value something that seems to be in opposition. I think in reality, once you start to embrace the other ideas, you'll see that they actually are very much connected to your values.
Well, so here's a practical application. Very recently, I joined a free group founded by the conservative New York Times opinion writer, David Brooks. I've admired his honesty and his willingness to entertain both sides, and he calls himself a conservative and, holds to that. But he decided to form an organization called Weavers, the Weavers, because he saw that the social fabric is breaking and that the only way to maintain it is to get people from all walks of life and opinions to come back together and reweave the threads. And I was so excited by that idea that I thought, okay, I'm going to join this conservative think tank group and try to have conversations with people who have very different opinions from me in order to weave those threads more strongly for the sake of our community.
That's so beautiful. And it immediately makes me think of this jazz legend, Daryl Davis, who's done some beautiful TED Talks about his experience as a Black man meeting KKK members and getting to know them by having respectful conversations with them. And he disagreed with them about a whole litany of things when they first met. But over time, just their conversations and the respect that they were getting for their values, which were not just anti-Black people or anti-Jews or whatever the issues were that they had, he found respect for some of their values that he found very universal. And that was at the core of the KKK setup. And as they got to know him, a lot of their values that were prejudices against Black people disintegrated because they were like, well, you literally have broken all of my stereotypes about Black people by me knowing you. So I can't hold that value anymore. And he's retired 30 some KKK cloaks that they've given him when they quit the KKK.
It's brilliant. That's beautiful.
Peaceful, loving way to do it. But he emphasizes it's so much about respect and curiosity and wanting to know how to love the other person.
A beautiful example is the 8-part podcast series called The Witch Hunt of J.K. Rowling, which is mostly J.K. Rowling trying to explain, give evidence for, and defend her beliefs, opinions, and political views on trans issues. But I think it's episode 7 that has 2 astonishing long interviews with trans people who have willingly listened to all of the audio recordings of J.K. Rowling explaining her position, and they are now responding. And the generosity and depth of beautiful articulation of their point of view and the respect that they have for J.K. Rowling and her point of view and their attempt to build a bridge back to her is just one of the most magnificent examples that I have ever seen. So it's well worth watching that podcast series if you're interested in that topic or just interested in how do you make a bridge between people who hold such different points of view. Andrew, this has been very exciting conversation. I hope that our talk has been conscious, that we've tried to do what we said we would do, which is have a meta conversation as we move in and out of giving examples and talking about the theory behind it, and that our listeners will have found it useful and that there will be something that they can take away and use in their next conversation to move it from belligerent or resentful or reactive into a conscious conversation. And of course, we'd love to hear from you. If you think we've gone off the rails somewhere, if you have a different perspective, please share it.
Maybe I just say something about that. When you critique somebody, it should be constructive criticism, right, is what we always say. But I think it's maybe more nuanced than that. You're trying to enter the conversation with your idea, right? You're seeing a blind spot. You're seeing something that's not sitting right with you. It could be your own prejudice that is actually coming up for you, but it also might be something they haven't thought of. And so entering that with curiosity, usually with questions, or like pointing out, well, did you think about this issue right here? That is the really healthy approach to getting people to engage with you and find that challenge to their ideology. And it might actually be a fruitful, conscious conversation that comes out of that.
As nonviolent communication technique says, the first thing you need to do is show them you were listening, right? By summarizing and restating what they said so that they know you heard me, you got me, you know what I said and what's behind it, why I said it. And now I will be willing to listen, because I know that you've respected me.
Yeah. And particularly in these times when there is a heightened amount of tribalism, you're going to have to also state some values that you agree with, like an entry code for them to go, okay, I'm going to let you in because there's enough in-groupness that you're showing me for me to go, okay, I'll engage with you. You're not just an enemy.
There's a bigger tribe. I acknowledge your tribe. I respect your tribe, but now there's a bigger tribe, right? And for us, the bigger tribe is we're all American citizens right now. And we have to keep going back. That's a bigger circle. And in a democracy, that's the bottom line. We, the people. I'm going to identify with that tribe. Are you willing to talk with me in that big circle? Well, fellow citizen, wonderful talking with you from the heart, my heart to your heart, my mind to your mind, my speech to your speech.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Andrew.